And thank you very much indeed for coming to this, the second summer conference for Save the Parish. This marks, I suppose, the second anniversary almost of Save the Parish being founded back in August, just towards the tail end of the pandemic. And in that time, I think there has been a notable change in the way in which parishes and parish ministry are being talked about in the Church of England, and the way in which both the national church institutions and the bishops are now viewing questions of the church and the future of the church. It doesn't necessarily seem to have changed very much action, but at the very least it's changed the way that we're talking, and that's a start, and it's a huge start. And this is in no small way down to you and the work you've done, each in your parishes and dioceses, to raise the profile of parish ministry in the Church of England. We decided that this conference should be focused around the parish, the church in action, to tell the good news of what parishes are doing across the country, whether in deprived urban areas in the north, or rural parishes in the southwest, or anything in between. Each parish knowing its particular context and transforming its particular context. That's what the genius of the parish system is. It isn't top down. It isn't one big vision that applies across the country. It's each area, each community, knowing how best to serve that community. There's so much that we would do if we were not, I suppose, agitating from, if not the sidelines anymore, but the sidelines of the heart of the Church of England. If we were actually at the heart and making the decisions ourselves, I'm sure there are many things that we would do differently. But now that we are in General Synod, there are some things that Save the Parish is able to do. We won our first amendment at the last synod. We managed to change a proposed law that would have allowed, during an interregnum, the bishop to decide to sell off parish lands without consultation with the PCC or a priest in charge. And now, thanks to the work of those who are in synod, any decision about parish lands during an interregnum has to be made with the agreement of the PCC and the incumbent. And that's the first of a set of small changes we hope that we can make that will actually re-empower the parish and the local community. Now, one big thing we're about to launch at this General Synod that's about to meet is, thanks to a little opening that we've been given by the Archbishop's Council, they've proposed a whole motion on revitalising parishes, which I think they thought might have been a sop to us. But what it's done is open the door to an amendment, and an amendment that might pump hundreds of millions of pounds into the poorest parishes of the country. You might not have seen, but last year in the budget that was prepared and presented and voted for by General Synod, although we weren't actually allowed to vote it down, the Archbishop's Council promised £150 million for revitalising parishes, that this would be divided between £50 million, which should go into Lower Income Communities Fund, and £100 million that would go into what's called Strategic Development Funding, or now it's been rebranded SMMI, and I can't remember what the new acronym means, I confess. Lower Income Communities Fund sounds good, but when it was studied by the Office for Budget Responsibility, the former head of it, Sir Robert Choate, found that an awful lot of dioceses get the money and then don't give it to the lowest income communities. It just goes straight into diocesan budgets. Strategic Development Funding, that was also studied by Sir Robert Choate, who found that it was a giant white elephant. £176 million had been spent over 6 years with the promise of bringing in 89,000 new Christians. And in the end, only 12,500 turned up, half of whom had come from other Anglican churches. So to borrow from Einstein, one of the signs of madness is to try and do again that which you already know has failed. This time they were going to pump in £100 million a year to this scheme. So what do we propose? 2 things. The first thing, that the lowest income communities fund must be changed and must be matched to parishes. And that it must be matched in order to the lowest, the most deprived parishes until the money runs out. And it must be matched so that it funds 1 stipendiary priest in each of the poorest parishes of the country. And secondly, that all of that £100 million that are being spent on the pet projects of bishops and the church commissioners should just go into the lowest income community fund. This would be a huge dose of money going into the poorest communities. It would ensure that the poorest parishes have priests. It would ensure that when dioceses are thinking, which church do we have to close, they no longer turn the evil eye upon the poorest parishes in their diocese. It would ensure that the whole diocesan budget would now have more money in it, and other parishes could have their parish shares reduced. It would be transformative, and it would enable the Church of England to fulfill its vow to be a Christian community a Christian presence in every community, and to give priority to the poor. So this is what we're proposing at this synod, and there's, who knows, let's say a reasonable chance of getting it passed. And if it doesn't pass, I want to see how they justify voting it down. So that's what we're unveiling today, in the hope that the money that the Church of England has, and that it's committed to its here today, gone tomorrow schemes, can actually go to reinforcing and revitalising the parishes of this country, so that we truly can be the church in action in every community in this country. Now, for the rest of this conference, we have many interesting and exciting speakers who will be talking about the different ways in which the parish is the church in action. And I've just got to tell you one little bit of housekeeping, which is that when we get round to questions, one of the 2 cameras here will be swiveled round to point at the questioner. But you're not being filmed. That's just so that the microphone can pick up your question. The other camera will be the one that's being used to continue the filming. So don't suddenly duck under a pew if you see that camera turn to you. It's just to pick up your question so that when this actually goes online, people know what the question is so they can understand the answer. Now, I'm delighted that our first speaker is Rachael Maskell, the MP for this constituency. So we're delighted. Well, we can't really welcome you here, but we're delighted that you've been able to be here in a way to host us. And Rachael is a member of the Ecclesiastical Committee of Parliament. This is one of the most important parliamentary committees, at least as far as the Church of England is concerned, because it is the committee that needs to decide whether legislation that is pushed up from General Synod should in fact be passed by Parliament. Because Parliament is a watching brief over the Church of England, and everything that General Synod does only as part of its delegated authority from Parliament. Rachael has been active, very active, in the Levelling Up Bill, which will be, hopefully, transformative for so many communities here in the north, and also a great help, we hope, to so many parishes around the country in areas that need levelling up. Rachael is going to speak about her experience of her experiences of the parishes in her constituency and around, and her experience on the Ecclesiastical Committee, and her knowledge of the church, of the parish as the church in action. So Rachel, delighted to welcome you here to our conference.
Well, good afternoon, and a really warm welcome to all of you in coming to York this weekend. And I hope you are enjoying our city so far, and it is a huge privilege to represent such an incredible city. I do tell people as they come and visit York and tell me what a beautiful city it is, and indeed it is a wonderful place to visit, not least with the Minster and the prominence of that and all that surrounds our city centre, is that if you look just beyond the walls, you can understand why it's a Labour seat. We experience significant areas, deprivation and poverty, and therefore it's a city of two halves. And we know that there is affluence and poverty living side by side in York, and it's my challenge to do that levelling up across York and to see our city come together as one. And it does that in amazing ways, not least through the leadership of the different churches across the city, no matter which denomination. For the last 20 plus years, the churches have met every week to pray for our city, and I think there is a real legacy that we can see in the 22 different services that it provides to those most in need in York from that. Today we're obviously debating, discussing, envisioning ourselves about what do we do around ensuring that there is a place of witness and worship in every community of our country. And I think sometimes it is easy to get caught up in the debate of buildings, as important as they are, and I'm going to go on to say of their importance, as opposed to thinking, really, what are we trying to see? What is our big dream? What is our big hope for the future? And I think often we get drawn down into committees and motions and amendments and how we wrestle this stuff through, and actually we lose then sight of what that big mission is. And I think it's really important to draw back down into that and to think really where we are on that journey and where we want to be. Are we here in a process of managing the decline of the church, as many of the papers would want to tell us, and here we are one by one shutting doors and manoeuvring services around? Or are we about opening up that opportunity in every single community, which I know is your ambition? And of course, within limited resources, which we all understand, particularly in this day and age, how do you best ensure that those resources are going into the things that really do matter? Because we pass through this world in such a short amount of time. I'm learning how short that time is as we move through. But what's the legacy we want to leave? What is that hope we want to leave? And what is the opportunity we want to leave? And of course, I know for each one of you, this isn't about the stones which have been laid for so long and the pretty churches that we love to visit and have such an expression of our past, but it is about the people. And that's really how we should talk about parish. And I think uniquely, the way that the church through its history has defined parish and set out the parameters of parish has enabled there to be witness in every corner of our country and to recognise its responsibility for the cure of souls to all within the bounds that have been defined. However, we do note that many in those communities have walked away from those churches, and those pews are no longer filled with the local population, and that presents a massive challenge to the church, but it also to the funding of the church as well. And this is a debate more about economics than the future hope that we want to see in the community. And yet, if we lose that debate, then we have lost all sense of mission and purpose. And whilst, of course, we celebrate initiatives which are invested in the future generations, in the young people, there's 16.3 million being invested in revitalising youth work and children's work. And my goodness, we need that. We recognise also that the church is filling so many spaces, which once it did occupy, the state then took control of. And now the state has let go, and we've got this huge void out there of where that safety net is. We have depended since that 1945 government and the coming together of the Beveridge Report, and then that first Labour government of putting in the welfare state, of that fact that society is going to be there for you, and there is a safety net there which no one will fall. Now that's all broken up, and we have got people in serious situations where they need to go to warm banks just to keep warm, or food banks to put food in their stomach. And of course it is the church which has stepped up in every community as a form of witness in that community to serve the people of that conurbation, that area. And sometimes that is rural, where we know there are significant levels of rural poverty, and that must never be forgotten, or it is in those urban establishments as well, which absolutely are seeing desperation. And that's why it's so important, that focal point of where people come for help. And as I mentioned in York, 22 different services reaching out, looking at babies groups, looking at, I've got a little list here, groups for dads, arts, music, choirs, groups for older people to gather because there is nothing else and nowhere else to go. Support for our refugees and our new communities, befriending schemes, helping people in debt and in desperation. And that has been the witness of the church through the years. The fact that it has stepped up to serve because people of faith are so focused and motivated to do that. But within the parish system, knowing that reliance of where those constituency boundaries lie. Now, I know as a constituency MP, when people contact me, and they're the same people contacting you, is that we say to them, well, I'm very sorry, but you're actually in York Outer, or you're somewhere else in the community, and I'd love to help you, but my constituency boundary says that you're outside. But I know somebody that can down the road because their MP can support you. In the same way, you know those bounds of the parish. And of course, you do not close the door, but you offer that support and you pass people on so they can be built within the community in which they live to get the support they need. And of course, we've got flexible kind of boundaries. We all know how that works. But to really focus on those individuals shows the importance of the parish and the strength that it brings in providing those absolute essential services. So yes, we want the investment in our young people, in our future. That is absolutely right. But we also need investment in community and service, and that sits well within those bounds. But it isn't just about that. At the moment, and for many, many years now, the church has been trying to manage this decline. So how does it do that? It says to congregations in the smaller parishes, well, of course you can have somebody to come and serve you, but we want you to share it. And share them not just necessarily with one parish or two parishes or three parishes or four parishes, perhaps it's 7 or 8. And then on a Sunday morning, what do you get? You get your local vicar, your priest running around from church to church, barely stopping for a cup of tea or a hello, moving on to the next to do another service, then on to the next. And everyone's thinking, well, he didn't stop here and say hello, or she had to run and didn't have time because actually I wanted to have a word. And that isn't fair on anyone. It's not fair on the community. It's not fair on the person serving that community. And you end up with your minister run ragged as they're trying to please so many agendas and try and do so much. And certainly when I was the national official in the Trade Union Unite supporting many vicars, we saw the burnout from that model. It doesn't work. And ultimately, if the church is about relationship, how can you build relationship when literally all you see of the person that is providing your leadership and serving you is somebody flashing by on a Sunday, and then during the week trying to meet every school, trying to serve every community, meet every group, and carry out all the different elements of ministry across the parish, but the parishes. And that doesn't work either. And I think we have to recognise the resource is limited, but that model is not for the future. The third thing that I've particularly focused on is what's happened across our communities. Because whilst I've talked about some of the ministries and services which churches have rightly filled the gap with and government have become dependent upon, it is not just that, it's the community itself. So what happened to the corner shop, the village pub, the post office, can you remember those? The youth club, the children's group? Well, their doors closed. And the only building standing now is the church. Its door ajar, as opposed to closed like so many. And if that is the only building, of which it is in so many communities, and of course we're not just talking buildings, what else is there to say you're a community at all? Perhaps you're just an assembly of houses randomly put in one location. And then what does that do to your identity as to who you are? Not least as we're seeing at the moment in so many wonderful villages, village life being sucked out by Airbnb and so many people moving in. The holiday homes have arrived, the second homes, and here you are trying to live your life in community, but your community is slipping away. Well, that cannot be what makes for a strong area either. And I have to say, one of my biggest fears are if the parish, if the church and the vicarage are all being sold off, perhaps to become an Airbnb, might I suggest, or even a second home. But are we just playing part of the capitalist system, which is absolutely tearing up our communities already? And of course, in York, we've got a problem with this. We've got 2,000 Airbnbs, and I'm seeing it day by day as across streets, people are just having party groups living next door to them. And I talk to my colleagues across the country, and they're saying, for instance, in Grasmere, there's only one family living there. The rest of that beautiful little village in the Lake District now is all holiday homes. The schools are closing. The community centres are closing. There is nothing left. So if the parish door closes too and becomes a holiday home or an Airbnb, it is just part of the system of this capitalist-driven world. Now, surely the church should be other to what is happening in being that stake in the ground to which all people feel welcome. And I think we are talking about really assessing where we are in our wider society, not just in the church, and to make a determination as to where we need to travel. And therefore, I would put it to you very much that the church should not be in that marketplace, where yes, it will perhaps draw in some resource, but at what cost that will come to the wider piece of society, I think we have to think carefully. And when I talk about this, and I look at what is happening, at the same time, we have got an identity crisis in our country, where people do not know who they are, let alone where they belong and what they stand for, because of the volatile political environment which has led them into that place of question. And if we then feed into that, because we take away the one thing that binds people together as a community, whether at certain set days of the year, for which for some that is what church is, but at least they can identify with that community, or perhaps on every Sunday of the year, or perhaps even just knowing that place of sanctuary is embedded within the community, then what are we leaving as our legacy? I just leave that thought with you, because I think we have to get the church meeting this week in York to really answer some of those questions. because this is fundamental, not just to who we are today and what we're about today, but also for the future and that investment for the future. But we can't walk away from the debate, and I think the debate must be welcome. I always say that, no matter how difficult debates are, because when you're in that space of debate and engagement, you start engaging with what the fundamental issues are, and sometimes those threats sharpen our minds so that we can then think how to deal with that. Now, in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, I sat on the committee for 6 months, twice a week, 2 days out of my 4 days in Westminster, poring over a bill this thick, working out what every line of that bill actually meant. And we put forward an amendment to say that we shouldn't see parish land, churches, vicarages just being sold off, because we could not see where the benefit came. Now, that amendment didn't reach a vote, as so many amendments don't. We attempted to try, but it's not always easy in the House of Commons to achieve that. However, in the House of Lords, clearly we have seen amendments move forward, as we've just heard. And the Bishop of Bristol, who is pushing her amendment about getting that resourcing and investment into the parish, did say when she was speaking, parish churches are vital to the flourishing of their local community. Powerful words. And therefore, we are hearing a recognition in Parliament of the importance of church in community, at the centre, at the hub. And therefore, I think, as much as we make the case of holding on to an asset, which is where I think this debate has moved to, into thinking about what is the witness of the church into the future. And I would challenge those bishops, and I often do, and I have done in the past most certainly, but I would challenge them around their vision for the church in our land, and to question their faith in what could be. Because if it is all about engaging with the markets and getting value, and then seeing the asset go, and perhaps some other commodity move in. And let's remember, as property is moving on at the moment, it makes all property prices rise, which pushes it even further away from people within their local community, make it harder for people to live in the one place where they have identity. But if we push back and say, perhaps with some provocation, I dare say, why are we accepting this as an option? Why are we accepting the decline, and why are we accepting the removal of our identity and our asset? I think we could put the questions not on you, but on the leadership of the church, and to raise their game for the future of the church in our land. And the reason I say that, I'm a Christian myself, and I draw heavily on what happened in Barvis in Lewis. 2 little old ladies, many of you will know the story. Peggy, she was blind, she was 84. And Christine, her sister, they lived together in a little croft, she was 82. And they lived in the little village of Barvis. I don't know if anyone has been there. Incredible place. I went there, I did a little pilgrimage on my bike up the Outer Hebrides, and I ended in Barvis, and somebody said to me, "Why have you come here? Nothing happens here." Interesting. But anyway, they were called to prayer. And from their empty church, where very few people came, these 2 women, sisters, got on their knees around their half brick of peat, which they lit on their floor, and they prayed. And they heard the words, "I will pour out water on the thirsty land and streams on dry ground." And they were committed in their prayer every night between 10 at night, 10 o'clock to 3 in the morning. And there was a revival in that church, and it completely changed the whole of the Hebrides, the Hebridean revival you would have heard of. And that church was bursting with people coming, flocking to that church. Now, that's just one church on one island in the Scottish Islands, which far away. But if the vision of the church for the leaders is to see the future of the church grow, that the gospel means something to the people of this country, that there is an essential place of witness, it challenges us all to say, what is our identity back in our communities and what are we doing? But also, what is the church doing? And it isn't just about the young people. It is about everybody and the fact that everybody has a part to play. And therefore, if you draw on the incredible leadership of two old ladies, Peggy and Christine, not known to anyone else, and to say they had faith and they saw their church filled, no one would have come around and said, well, let's sell off that church as well, shall we? Because actually it was bursting with life. And there is no reason why the churches right across our land cannot burst with life again. And it may be, first of all, to those people which are in their Airbnbs and visiting the village, who knows? But it could be beyond that, to the community, to the children, to the older people. Yes, providing services as a means of servicing God, that people are servicing their community and helping people through the challenges they're facing in their lives at this time. Being a warm welcome to that community, inviting people into that space and serving. That would be a very different challenge and a very different problem the church is going to have to solve. But you're not going to invite them along to the guest house at the local, which they've sold off long ago, and say, this is where we go. Oh no, we shut that door, we took the check and we spent it. You're saying that actually the church still has relevance in every single community, in every single parish across the land, because we raised our faith at the time of challenge and we wouldn't take that challenge on, and we've gone back now to those bishops to say, where is your faith for the church you are leading? So I would say, do not give up on your hope. And do not give up on your project, because it is really important about ensuring there is an establishment and a place of witness in every single community across our land, which is amazing. If you think about other countries, think of North Korea, think of the Christians in North Korea, what they would do to be in this predicament you're in. You know, we've got privilege, haven't we? We've got huge opportunity. And we mustn't squander the day for the sake of the markets and the capitalists moving in and taking their share. We must save the day and save the opportunity to see the salvation of our nation, which, my goodness, if ever it needed the church to step up, it is a time such as this. So I would challenge back to you and say, be that witness in your community, provide those services to your community, come together and raise your level of faith and have hope that your parish is so important to your community. And yes, we must invest in the young people and we must invest in youth leadership, because that's really, really important. But we must invest in every community, because when we live the majority of our time in community, we need the young people to draw on the experience and the lives lived by the older people. We need the older people to pass on all that they have gathered over their years, their wisdom, to the younger people, so that we actually get the benefit of intergenerational living, which only a parish can do. So there is huge opportunity before the Church of England at this time. And I just urge it to wake up to that opportunity, to have faith and hope once again, that it has purpose and importance in our nation, in being able to build for the future, in being able to take that stake. And therefore, I would say, do not rush into these things to the church, because they do not know what doors they are closing and what opportunities will be lost if they continue on the line that they're on. Yes, it may be challenging and it may be difficult, But as we've seen with the amendment put down by the Bishop of Bristol, told at the time it was not needed, and then we have seen movement on government. Well, going back to where I started, not the church but the buildings. Oh, this is part of our heritage. This is part of our piece in history, which those stones have been faithfully laid. Well, perhaps government can do more. Perhaps the church doesn't just have to look from within to be able to solve some of those challenges, which it is trying to. There are other resources out there which must be drawn on. And of course, whatever those means are, perhaps they will come to us and we will learn. But let's not squander the opportunity and the unique position the Church of England has in being able to be that place of witness, the cure of souls in every single community up and down our country for now, for this generation, and for the next and our future. Thank you.
These priorities are what? Making you hear the voice of the parishes. So I'd like to hear your thoughts on it.
Thank you very much. And the Ecclesiastical Committee is quite unique in the way that it works across Parliament. So it's got parliamentarians from the Commons and the Lords, cross-party, sitting on that, chaired by Elizabeth Butler-Slush. And we work very closely. And I think some of the most powerful interventions, yes, we have formal sittings of the committee, but we also have informal sessions as well. And sometimes they're the most important because that gives us the opportunity to be able to bring question to the thinking of the church, to examine what is being put forward there in advance perhaps of legislation coming through, and to bring good scrutiny to processes. So there is a great opportunity for us in Parliament, and we also get monthly or thereabouts questions to the Second Commissioner of the Church of England, Andrew Selous, who's a Conservative MP, who's incredibly helpful as well in these matters. And my learning, I've been in Parliament 8 years, my learning is that if you don't ask, you don't get. But if you do ask, there's normally a way of trying to move things forward. Yes, it moves slowly. We all understand these big organisations move slowly. But if we do push on some doors, we can certainly ask questions and have discussions around key issues. But obviously what we need to hear are what are the questions we should be asking as parliamentarians. Now, some people will bring that from their own parish experiences. Other people will bring that from elsewhere. So there are lots of levers that we can pull to put a spotlight on the issues that we want to be able to address. So I would say there is no door which is closed to us. Now, obviously, within the constitutional kind of relationship, yes, we have to agree whether we consent or do not consent to legislation. It's not a committee that meets regularly. It's maybe 2-3 times a year. But when we do meet, we have got that opportunity. But in between, we also can bring that scrutiny. So as parliamentarians, there's nothing to stop us asking questions. On top of that, we've got the opportunity to put down written questions. So the oral questions are out once a month. We can put down written questions. As MPs, we can put down up to 20 written questions a day. So that's quite a lot of scrutiny as well. If you think there's 650 of us, 20, you do the maths. So there's a great opportunity to be able to bring scrutiny in that way. So there is certainly ways that we can question the church commissioners as to kind of their thinking, what they're doing, and how they're giving oversight. So, and of course, we can just ask for a meeting, see what happens. If they say no, there's always another way. So there is certainly things that we can do as individual members of the committee or collectively. And of course, as a committee, we do talk cross-party and cross-house in between the formal set piece, which appears on camera. So tell us what you want to know, what representation you feel is necessary, because that will help our processes to either scrutinise and dig or question or be enlightened by what has to be presented to us.
Thank you. Any other questions, sir? Oh, have you still got your microphone?
I've got two microphones. I hope
But
they're...
you can't hear at the back. The question...
So I'll repeat the question back. That was a question about the instruments which the members of the Ecclesiastical Committee have.
I'm afraid we've only got one internal microphone. Can I say another question for... Sir?
Ago, I had a passing conversation with a diocesan director of strategy in the hallway of a vicarage, and they told me that their plan for the strategy that they were developing, and this is a direct quote, was to flog everything that moves because it's people that matter. And I wanted to ask the question of what we could do to be encouraged that it's not just these assets which can be used in projects in the immediate. I didn't want to appear that I didn't think people mattered by challenging this plan to flog everything that moves. But rather, what can legislatively be done in order to protect assets so that assets that it's not about the money, but about the opportunity, that perhaps the opportunity is not there right now, but could be in the future, could be put in place. Reading church history, and particularly at the beginning of the 19th century, when there were so many churches that went to rack and ruin, in parishes where perhaps the incumbent wasn't even ministering in the parish, but when the revival came along much later, particularly in industrious areas, there was a great fruitful ministry that was at the heart of communities, which perhaps that could not have happened had those assets been flogged some decades earlier. So my question is about what we can do to be encouraged in retaining those assets. I was particularly encouraged recently about a move to allow churches to lay fallow, that perhaps they won't be used now, but we don't want to just dispose of that in the future. So that's, in gist, that's my question.
Thank you. So this is a question about how do we ensure that we don't lose that asset in essence, even if perhaps today we're not seeing that asset flourish and full, but for the future. And I think we've got to look at these assets, and obviously they're difficult. They're old buildings. Many of them have got huge demands for reparation within the material work of the buildings. The land needs keeping up, and that's no easy measure, as we know with all historic buildings. But I would ask, what is the relationship with the building? So is there a way it can be held in trust? Is there other aspects which can help participate in the upkeep of the fabric of the building, whilst the space in the building is still seen as being the domain of the church? So I think there are some great opportunities to explore that whole arena of what are the opportunities out there. We know that for many country houses, that instead of letting them go to rack and ruin, we had organisations like the National Trust or English Heritage move in, and they've taken over the fabric of those particular buildings. It takes over many different types of sites in rural and urban environments as well. And therefore, what is the role of other stratas of society to help with the maintenance and care of the material factors versus the space? And I think that could be a very interesting discussion to be had within the wider context of society, because whilst it may be an issue for the church, it will be an issue for many of our historic monuments, as they're referred to. I mean, here in York, we're lucky we've got the British Archaeological Society based in the city, and what is their role in looking at after our heritage, because clearly it's got a very fundamental role. So I think there could be some very creative conversations with organisations which exist or perhaps don't even exist to date, which can take on responsibility for looking after the material of some of our monuments as they would be classified under law, and how the church could relate to that. So I think we've got to keep an open mind about that, but keeping the parish and the space for its future use as well as perhaps its use today. So it just feels that this debate is at a very rudimentary stage rather than reaching its conclusion as to where it can go. And I would very much encourage to push those which are making decisions to be far more creative in their thinking about the opportunity, about preserving what they can, but why be the only person journeying in that space or wrestling with these issues, perhaps working with others who have got influence and opportunity to be able to provide some of that support and services.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for one more. Roy, you had your hand up for a while.
I'd like to just ask a general point relating to your influence on the Ecclesiastical Committee in respect to the Church Commissioners. A lot of the problems the Church is faced with at the moment are due to the fact that most dioceses are in deficit. And the Church Commissioners is sitting on literally £10 billion worth of investment. And over the last 10 years, that has created at least 1 billion a year, 10% return. In fact, in 2021, they got 1.3 billion. Now, from what Rob mentioned earlier, the expenditure which is being used from this money is roughly of the order of 500 million a year, even allowing for these extra initiatives. So this leaves a gap of 500 million, which I would argue the Church Commissioners should be thinking about spending on the survival of its church. To what extent do you think you can aid and assist them to release a bit more of this money that they're sitting on?
Thank you ever so much, Roy, for your question. I want to throw that question back because I think we, as a committee, I don't want to overstate our powers. We've certainly got the powers of scrutiny and influence, for sure. But I think you have a lot of power too. And I don't think you should lose sight of the opportunity you have to make cohesive cases to say that actually we want to understand the finances far, far better of the Church of England. I mean, we know the wealth is considerable, and clearly the church is waiting for that rainy day. I would just suggest that the rain is starting to fall. Now, we can use that as a one with optimism, that kind of that analogy. But we've got to understand, where is that money planned for the long term? What is the purpose of having a massive bank account when, you know, an ownership all this land as well, if it is not going to be for ensuring that we have got a place of witness in every corner of the country? So I think there is a great opportunity for that scrutiny for yourselves, but also there's no reason why the Ecclesiastical Committee cannot be asking some of those questions likewise.
Thank you. Now, we slotted into this programme something that we tried out in Parliament during our Save the Parish in Parliament, which was just having a small little slot, and we've given about 15 minutes where people can tell good stories about what their parishes are doing. Or, I suppose, horror stories about what the diocese is doing, if you want. But either way, whilst we have Rachael here, as a member of the Ecclesiastical Committee, actually, it's all very well us speaking at the front about what parishes can do. What we'd love is just a few people to say what your parishes are doing, how you are the church in action. So, Madam. What about 2 minutes each? Yes, please. Oh, no, Madam. Oh yes, if that's all right.
Yeah, what I really think we need to do, we're missing the point here, I think we need to invest more money in trained, ordained ministers for the cure of souls rather than more ministers who seem to be trained to run a business. And that's where I think it's not about the buildings and everything else. It's about the cure of souls, and I think that's what we've lost.
Sir.
It's a long way from Cornwall to York. It's taken me 2 days. I've come, and I hope this doesn't eat into my 2 minutes, I've become because this is so important. So in Cornwall, church life in Cornwall faces irrevocable change for the worse due to restructuring plans known as On the Way. This is threatening the whole basis of our church. It's being pushed through ruthlessly by the bishops and archdeacons of the Diocese of Truro. Gone is the idea of priests in parishes. The bishops of Truro and St Germans plan for oversight ministry, aka oversight management, which will see ever fewer manager priests tasked with running lay teams to cure the souls, except they can't. New teams of lay ministers are being encouraged, and communion by extension. Remember this phrase because it will come your way. Communion by extension, whereby a priest somewhere blesses a bit of bread and a bit of wine, and anybody can take it and give you communion under this plan. Does that sound like the Church of England we all signed up for? I don't think so. In one deanery, Kerrier, the final approved plan calls for just 2 priests to be in charge of 23 separate and widespread churches. By default, how many of those churches are going to close purely by decline? Who is going to go if there's no priest to preach to them, or talk to them, or care for them, or listen? Existing stipendiary clergy have been driven out or chopped to make way for them. Clergy cuts being implemented have led to the iniquitous inequality with a ratio of stipendiary priests to parishioners in the poorest areas, mine, from 1 in 14,000 people to the rich areas, which the priests are quite happy to facilitate, they get 1 in 5,000. The LICF has been used as a way to pay for those priests, in the 1 in 14,000, and the money then taken away and spent elsewhere on the mission projects.
Levelling up?
Well, maybe. Opposition has been crushed, dissenting voices silenced, alternative ideas sidelined or ignored. But in the very best sense of the word, the Cornish are revolting. Increasingly, both parishioners and priests are saying no and rising up to resist this ecclesiastical vandalism. At least one priest, one vicar who was hired recently has now resigned because no one told him that he was going to be a pen pusher, administering lay people, paid lay people. They're hiring people at better salaries than is the average in Cornwall to replace vicars and paying them more than they paid vicars. Thankfully, church wardens, treasurers, church council members, lay reeves, ordinary parishioners and even non-churchgoers, very important non-churchgoers, are now bravely fighting back and saying no to the bishops and archdeacons. We have a branch, and it's really important for you in your area. We created, with the help of Marcus and our friends here, we created Save the Parish Cornwall. We fight. We have created a movement. We have we've done it by social media, by meetings, by press, and it's had some effect. I don't know whether you've heard, but our bishop has left today. Yeah, it's an astonishing example of the blindness of the centre. So this man who is now going to Winchester, which had a whole series of problems which are identical to the problems he's created in Cornwall and he's running away from now as they're all collapsing around his ears. So what we have done is try to encourage us and coordinate and spread the word about we must fight back. We're in the middle of creating a report, actually, of the goings-on of the bishops and the archdeacons and their abominable treatment of their parishioners. And we're compiling this book, which we're going to publish. It is devastating, I tell you. Most of all, fight back. Fight back.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right, we've got time for one more. Sir. Ian, you won't be picked up if you don't. Oh, there might be another one coming up. Oh, we've got a second.
But one I will ask is, would you comment on the effectiveness of our bishops in the House of Lords?
Right. That was very short. We've got one more, a good news story or a horror story from your parish, from your own parishes. One more before we ask Rachel to reply. Oh, Ian wants to give us a good or bad news story.
I told you I had a few.
Hold it to your mouth, to your mouth.
Right, sorry. The value of the Church's social work in our communities was put at some extraordinary value recently. Is this recognised in Parliament? Is our political class, and I'm not making a political point here, our political class taking the Church for granted?
I'm not sure that was precisely a good news story per se. But if there's one more parish anecdote, otherwise I shall ask Rachel to reply.
I think I'll hold it. Thank you so much for those comments. It's great to hear what's going well as well. And we must remember out there, as we fight our battles, the Church does amazing things across our country in every single community, whether it's visiting somebody on their own, whether it is providing space for children to run wild and free and parents just to breathe, or whether it is visiting the sick and supporting the local community. So thank you for sharing those anecdotes as well. I think it's really interesting when you were talking about greater resources going to places of greater affluence, because we know the needs across all of our communities, and we need to make sure that we don't see an inequality growing, as we see in so many different areas, whether it's around health and finance and social access and education. We don't see an inequality in faith. So I think there was a very powerful point, that data, and data is always really, really useful for parliamentarians as well as for making your arguments. So data in a rich source about proving what's happening, I think can be very powerful. With regards to, the stories of the dismantling of churches, and your hope of what is to come, and to hear that Cornwall is revolting, I think is going back to a very, as beautiful as it is, I should add, is a really important piece, because I think across, and this is my political analysis of where we are at this time, we have conceded so much power across our country into those who purport to hold it, that we haven't held individuals to account, and we have enabled people to use that power in various ways. And I'm talking about in the political context, not the kind of theological context or a theocracy in that sense. But we very much concede, and somehow we've been quite afraid to stamp our ground, to rise up and to have our say and to speak. And when the challenge I put to you is, when we concede our power, we essentially hold back ourselves and we enable others to step forward. So power always needs challenging. That's what politics is ultimately about, a challenge of power. And therefore we have to hold our power, join it together, claim it, and move into those spaces. And you have got powerful stories to tell. Let's face it, the media love you. They absolutely do. But we don't want to see the church in a place of conflict. Of course we don't. And that makes us all take a little bit of a step back, because we think, how can we do this wisely? And I think using your power to challenge the relationships is important, to say, actually, we're all in this messy world together and we're trying to solve some very difficult questions. You're going too fast, and perhaps you're going too far on your own. Let's go together, and let's go at a pace together and in the right direction. Because leaders aren't leaders if they don't have followers. They're just people going for a walk on their own. So use your power wisely, join it together, and determine how you can get the leverage you need. And it's not about who wins, which is what politics in Westminster has come back to, is who wins the vote or who wins. This is much bigger than that. This is much too important for that. This is about how you have quality of conversation, how you have a quality of understanding, and challenge back, the tug of war which may be going on within the church. It certainly is in politics at the moment, and this very divisive environment we're in. But actually challenge back about the character of your debate and the importance of that, and then take it forward at the pace that it is needed to. The effectiveness of bishops in the House of Lords. Well, my own party has said that we're going to scrap the House of Lords, so this may be a very short-lived question in the light of the polls at the moment. But all I can say is, at the moment, when we are dealing with such awful legislation, I'm really thankful that they're there. And I think this week, certainly, they may not be in your space at the moment and thinking around parishes, but I can certainly say when we're dealing with what I'm calling the illegal migration bill, which is about othering others, I think their words have been very powerful. So I would say they're adding value at that place. And we need that. We need that witness in both houses of faith-driven people who are speaking up unashamedly and unreservedly for the very people who are being ostracized by this government. So I value those words which are being spoken in those public places, but there could well be change. And we need to work that one through very clearly. I will say no more because we haven't had the election yet, but that's down to you and you using your power. So put that cross in the box where you choose. Finally, investing more in the cure of souls. I couldn't agree more. That is the whole purpose of parish ministry, is to invest in the very people in our communities who desperately need to have good news brought to them of their eternal hope in Jesus Christ. And if the church loses sight of that and pours it into investments and buildings and wrangles with those elements which will slip through its fingers at the day of eternity, it's lost sight of its mission.
Yeah. Rachel, thank you so much for coming here today and for speaking to us, and I think lifting our hearts and giving us some hope and some reassurance in what we do, each in our several ways, each in our several places. And thank you for being here with us in your place and for showing us a little bit of what you do in Parliament to support what we do all around the country. Ladies and gentlemen, Rachael Maskell. Thank you very much indeed.